G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza and this video is a video on composition, meaning how to put together an image and some things that you can keep in mind for your illustrations and images to sort of use as a basis reference point that you can apply to make something work in a harmonious way or in a disharmonious, sort of uncomfortable way. That's an artistic choice like asymmetry and things like that. This video is part of a video set I've created called The Fundamentals of Drawing. So if you want to check out the other videos as part of this set, make sure to click the video on the screen and in the description. And of course, as always, if you want to check out the reference files that I've created here. So for example, this Photoshop file, it's free for download, also link in the description. So I've got 6 different little 16:9 frames here, and I'm going to use these as sort of imaginary canvases to demonstrate some ideas. And I'm just going to very roughly illustrate some of these ideas of composition, some of the fundamental things you can keep in mind or use as a reference or guide for when composing illustrations yourself. The first is the most straightforward and simple, and it's what is called center biased. And that means that essentially whatever you're painting, the central area of the image is the focal point. So this might be a city square with a town hall in the middle, people running around the city, or city buildings all around it and such. In these images, elements of perspective, usually one-point perspective, help the viewer's eye sort of be directed towards this central focal point. So if it's a landscape piece, usually the central focused, center biased image, whether it be a building or a landmark or a figure, is in the center. But aside from having it in the center, which is the most obvious aspect of center bias, we can use elements around the image to point the viewer's eye towards the center. It could be doing things like keeping the upper parts of the image quite simplistic so that the viewer's eye isn't stuck at the top, because we naturally look starting here as the home base and then looking in this direction. So our eye naturally goes to the top left first and then reads down and then to the right. So if this area is most simple and then we have the greatest area of contrast happening here in the middle, the reader's eye is drawn to the center and we get that center biased image. Then of course, like I mentioned, we can use elements of perspective to point the viewer's eye there, and we can use elements of foreground images or things to sort of block or distract the eye from the front, so that once again the eye is most clearly pulled to the center of the page where the focal point is. The next point of composition is something that's also well known in the photography world, and that is called the rule of thirds. And that is where essentially we divide our image, it's a little askew here, into 3 horizontal parts. And often the painter or photographer or illustrator picks one of these 2 lines to be the horizon line. The lower line is usually the most often picked as a horizon point because it's the most easy on the eye, and then the image is divided into thirds vertically. The idea in the rule of thirds is that placing the objects of most interest in these areas, or where these lines intersect, creates the greatest sense of balance and harmony in an image. And it can also be used as a great tool for composition. For example, if you want to lay things out and have some interest, if you have an area that takes up a large amount of the stage, for example, if we had a lot of this image covered by a draped cloth, we could use the rule of thirds to keep it to the rightmost third of the image, furthest away from where the eye will naturally look, and have our life drawing in the more central part of these images with the focal point in the other vertical intersecting line. There are lots of ways that you can use this. Placement is one of the most obvious ways that we can use the rule of thirds, and it's usually just to help us understand how to create a sense of balance and harmony. Next, background, midground, and foreground. These are the 3 core elements of most images, and that's where we can have different elements of interest in the distance, and then in the middle area, and then in the foreground. So let's say, for example, I draw a horizon line. I might have some mountains far off in the distance with a volcano going off. This would be considered the background. The midground might be a town, and let's just sort of symbolize this with a bit of a cube shape, a rectangle-y shape there. It's not too fancy, but we'll just sort of pretend that there are a few towers in this town here, a few little houses, and I'll draw some roofs. And then finally, we might have a figure in the foreground, like this, looking off into the distance to see this erupting volcano. And all of a sudden, because of these three elements, the background, the midground, and the foreground, are all placed together, they give each other a context. Because if we didn't have the background and midground, the foreground, this character, wouldn't make much sense. It would be someone looking at something and then there's no sense of drama or tension. If we just had the midground, there's no threat, which is the background, and there's no sense of awareness, which is in the foreground. And then finally, if we have the threat, this volcano, it's not threatening anything if we don't have the midground and foreground. So this is just a simple example as to how we can use the elements of the background, midground, and foreground to complement one another to create a sense of interest and drama. Next, we can create focal points using contrast. Focal points are important when we compose our images because we tell our viewers what to look at. So let's say, for example, I have a horizon with a hero over here. It's a silhouette figure, it's nothing too fancy, and he's going to be standing there facing towards someone in the foreground. He's going to be holding a weapon of some kind and wielding a shield, and then in the foreground we might have someone looking at them with their mouth open. To create a sense of contrast, we can tell the viewer what to focus on. If we made everything dark except for this person in the foreground, we would be telling our viewer to look at him. But if we didn't do that, if instead perhaps we had a very bright sword, so bright in fact that it was glowing, and that everything else had sort of a mid-tone in terms of its contrast. It wasn't too bright or too dark, but this sword was extremely bright and surrounded by dark shadows reflected on the person holding it, then of course we're telling our viewer to look at this. So we can use contrast to create focal points for the viewer and tell them what to look at and focus on. Similarly, we can tell our viewer what to focus on by blurring something. And this is what we call depth of field using cameras. But of course, when we're illustrating, we're not really using a camera. We are the camera, we're creating the camera. So I'm just going to go over here and copy this terrible example and drag it across. And you can see this in example. If I select everything except for the front dude and add a blur in Photoshop, we then naturally force the viewer to focus on this image in the front. And it's like this depth of field is happening, that the lens is focused on this front figure. We can do the reverse, of course. If we undo that and select this front figure, we can add our blur to our front figure, and it looks as if we're looking past this person over his shoulder to the figure with the sword, and we can see that the blur is guiding our eye to this focal point. And it's a really useful tool that we can use as well, especially in much more cinematic shots. I'm just going to erase this sword because we don't need the glowing because the contrast is in the other example. You can see how in the example on the left, the focal point is the contrast of the sword, but then in the example on the right, the focal point is created by using this field of view blur. And then the final example that I'm going to use is using asymmetry. Symmetry is where things are balanced and even. This is symmetrical. Symmetry is where if I have a box here, then to balance it out, I might have a chair here, and then we have some visual things coming together to creating a sense of unity. This is sort of what our rule of thirds does here. We're using symmetry and aspects of lining things up in certain ways to create a sense of balance. We can use asymmetry, or however you say it, to do the opposite. We can use it to instill discomfort or create a sense of impending doom or bad things or just unease. And it's as simple as, let's say for example, I draw a head. This is a person's head. The fact is, I know you're all incredibly impressed at the amazing drawings in this video, but I'm just trying to illustrate some of these composition techniques. So I hope you'll forgive my fairly brisk drawings. So here is my wonderful illustration of a dude. Hey dude, how you going? This is a pretty calm, easy to look at picture. But if I take this and transform it and tilt it, not 45 degrees, because 45 degrees is almost a symmetrical angle, and let's just put it off from the center a bit, and let's not have him smile, because a smile is a little too symmetrical and a little too happy. Let's have him have an uneasy face like this. It helps too if I have other elements in the scene, like an asymmetrical horizon line and perhaps a building too that has perspective points that are showing that everything is sort of askew. And then in doing this, you can see already using asymmetry, we've aided the sense of discomfort. If we put it back to a straight on angle, you can see how immediately it looks more comfortable. But when we throw it back into asymmetry, we create that sense of discomfort, and that can be a really useful tool. So I hope this video has been useful to you to show some of the fundamental things you can keep in mind when you're composing an image. Once again, make sure to click the link on the screen and in the description to go check out the other videos in this fundamentals of drawing compilation, I suppose you might call it. And if you're interested in checking out the reference files for this and all the other videos, the links are in the description to those. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen, and until next time, I'll see you later.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel to see new content every week. Check out more of my stuff by clicking the annotations over there. You can get the reference files for this tutorial by clicking the link in the description, and if you want the reference files for all the tutorials I've ever made, check out the tutorial archive. If you're looking for a great place to collaborate, explore, or share your own content, head over to newgrounds.com. That's it for now, and until next time, see you later.